There are things in the void that should not be named, and I have seen one born. I was Magos Secundus Helion Vex of the Adeptus Mechanicus, assigned to the observation station Gamma Tertius on the edge of the Cicatrix Maledictum, where the stars themselves seemed to bleed light into the darkness. My function was simple: record, catalog, measure. I existed to transform mystery into data, to reduce the incomprehensible universe into streams of binharic code that could be stored, analyzed, and filed within the endless archives of Mars. For 11 years I performed this task without deviation, watching distant stellar phenomena through augmented eyes that never blinked, recording gravitational anomalies that rippled through space like tremors through flesh. I believed myself beyond surprise. I believed the universe held patterns I could learn to predict. I was wrong in ways that still echo through the remaining organic portions of my brain, whispering truths I wish I could delete. The birth happened without warning, though later analysis would reveal we had been observing the precursor signs for months without recognizing them. There had been distortions in local space, readings that suggested massive gravitational displacement occurring in regions we had classified as empty void. Background radiation patterns shifted in ways our algorithms flagged as anomalous but not threatening. We recorded everything, as protocol demanded, feeding data into cogitator banks that hummed with the accumulated observations of decades. None of it prepared us for what emerged. The void itself seemed to split open, not with violence but with a terrible organic deliberation, like skin parting around a wound that had been festering beneath the surface. What came through was not a ship in any conventional sense. It was a living thing, vast beyond immediate comprehension, its surface writhing with motion that seemed to follow no mechanical principle. The hull, if such a word could apply, pulsed with rhythms that suggested breath, digestion, circulation. I watched through every scanning array at my disposal as this thing oriented itself in space with movements that were unmistakably purposeful, unmistakably alive. The first coherent thought I managed was that we had witnessed the birth of a predator. My station was equipped with observation technology that could analyze stellar composition from 1,000 light-years away, could track individual asteroids through debris fields spanning entire star systems, could detect the heat signature of a single human body against the cold of space from distances that made planets look like motes of dust. I turned all of it toward the newborn creature. The data that returned was worse than incomprehensible. It was contradictory in ways that violated basic principles of physics and biology simultaneously. The object measured approximately 43 kilometers in length, though its exact dimensions seemed to fluctuate as I watched. Its mass readings suggested densities that should have created gravitational wells capable of capturing nearby debris, yet objects passed near it without deviation. Surface temperature scans returned values ranging from near absolute zero to temperatures that should have vaporized organic matter, sometimes from the same section of hull measured seconds apart. The thing was covered in protrusions that resembled nothing in my extensive database of xenoforms and vessel classifications. Some looked like towers of calcified bone, others like forests of chitinous spines, still others like vast sensory organs that turned slowly in space as if tasting the void itself. I activated every long-range auger, every passive sensor array, every piece of observation equipment the station possessed. The data streams became torrents. I processed them all, my augmented mind sorting through terabytes of information with mechanical efficiency, even as the organic portions of my consciousness recoiled from what the patterns revealed. This was not a ship that had been built, it had been grown. Every curve and spine and cavity followed principles of biological development rather than engineering. I could see what looked like circulatory systems visible beneath translucent sections of hull, vast tubes that pulsed with rhythmic contractions, pushing fluids that glowed with bioluminescence. I could see structures that resembled organs, arranged in patterns that suggested functionality I could not begin to guess. I could see what looked unmistakably like neural tissue spreading across the inner surface of the hull in dendritic patterns, creating networks that pulsed with electrical activity visible even through the creature's outer layers. It moved, not with the simple momentum of a ship under thrust, but with muscular contractions that rippled along its length, propelling it through space with movements that seemed to defy the absence of medium to push against. I watched appendages unfurl from the main body, each one hundreds of meters long, each one flexing and testing the void around it, like a newborn creature learning the limits of its own body. Some of these appendages ended in structures that looked like weapons, arrays of biological cannons and acid sacs, and launch tubes that puckered and dilated as if practicing the motions they would soon perform in earnest. Others ended in grasping organs, massive claws and tendrils, and sucker-lined arms that opened and closed with rhythmic precision. I realized with dawning horror that I was watching the thing conduct self-examination, that it possessed enough awareness to test its own capabilities. The station's cogitator systems began flagging psychic disturbances. We were equipped with basic warp sense arrays, crude devices compared to what the Inquisition deployed, but sufficient for detecting major empiric activity. The readings spiked the moment I turned them toward the bioship, not the chaotic, roiling signatures associated with warp storms or demonic manifestation, but something different, something focused and purposeful and utterly alien. The psychic emanations came in pulses, regular as a heartbeat, each one carrying what my systems interpreted as command protocols. I watched the data scroll across my display and felt my remaining human instincts scream warnings my mechanical components could not process. This thing was not just alive, it was intelligent, not in any way I could relate to, not possessing thoughts or emotions or desires as organic beings understood them, but intelligent in the way a perfect machine is intelligent, carrying out functions with absolute efficiency because it had been designed for nothing else. I transmitted my initial findings to Mars, a compressed data burst that would take months to arrive and months more to be analyzed by tech priests who might or might not find my observations worthy of investigation. Protocol demanded it. Protocol also demanded I continue observation until either the subject moved beyond scanner range or new orders arrived. I settled in to watch, configuring my station systems for extended surveillance, diverting power from life support I barely needed to augmentation arrays and recording devices. I told myself this was a unique opportunity for knowledge, that understanding this xenoform could provide insights valuable to the Omnissiah's great work. I did not yet understand that I was watching something that existed beyond the boundaries of knowledge as the Mechanicus conceived it, something that violated the basic principle that understanding led to mastery. The bioship began to feed. Small objects drifted in the void around it, debris from some ancient cataclysm, or perhaps simply the dust and ice that accumulated in interstellar space. I watched appendages extend, saw them sweep through the void, gathering these fragments with motions that reminded me sickeningly of a human hand scooping food. The gathered material was drawn toward openings in the hull that dilated like mouths, vast sphincters of muscle tissue that gaped wide enough to swallow hab blocks whole. I magnified the image, focused my most powerful optical arrays on these feeding apertures, and saw the interior for the first time. The passages beyond the openings glistened with moisture, their walls lined with what looked like cilia or sensory bristles that waved in patterns suggesting they were tasting what entered. The debris was drawn deeper into the ship, pulled along by peristaltic contractions visible through the semi-translucent tissues. I tracked the material's progress through the bioship's body using thermal imaging and mass detection. It traveled through a network of passages that branched and reconnected in patterns reminiscent of digestive systems, moving deeper into the core with each contraction. Eventually, it arrived in what I could only classify as a stomach, a chamber, perhaps 2 kilometers across, where my sensors detected a sudden spike in temperature and chemical activity. The debris was being dissolved, broken down at molecular level by acids and enzymes of such potency that my analysis systems flagged several as theoretically impossible given known chemical processes. What remained after digestion was not waste but raw material, organic slurry rich in carbon and trace elements that was pumped through more passages to destinations throughout the ship's body. I watched this feeding cycle repeat dozens of times over the following hours. The bioship was not merely consuming the debris, it was incorporating it, using the broken down matter to grow. I could measure the changes, Small but detectable expansions in hull sections, new protrusions beginning to bud from the main body, existing structures growing denser and more complex. This thing did not have a metabolism in the traditional sense. It was a metabolism. Its entire existence oriented around the consumption and conversion of matter into more of itself. Every system I could identify served this single purpose. The circulatory network distributed nutrients. The neural web coordinated the hunting and feeding processes. The psychic pulses I detected were command signals, orchestrating the actions of countless subsystems with precision that made Imperial void ship operations look like the fumbling of children. 3 days after the birth, the bioship began moving with clear purpose. Its earlier movements had been exploratory, tentative. Now, it oriented itself toward a specific vector and began accelerating with muscular pulses that built steadily in frequency and power. I calculated its trajectory and felt something cold settle in my chest cavity where organic hearts once beat. It was heading toward inhabited space, toward the Tigris system, a cluster of mining worlds and orbital facilities supporting a population of approximately 4 billion Imperial citizens. The distance was vast, but at its current acceleration rate, the bioship would arrive within standard months. I transmitted another burst to Mars, this one flagged with urgent priority codes. I knew it would not matter. The bioship would reach Tigris long before any response could arrive, let alone any relief fleet. I should have maintained my distance, continued passive observation from the safety of my station. Instead, I made a decision that would define the remainder of my existence. I activated the station's small complement of observation drones, sophisticated sensor packages equipped with limited maneuverability and designed for close-range survey work. I programmed them to approach the bioship, to attempt external mapping of its structure, and if possible to find entry points where sensors could be deployed to observe internal conditions. I told myself this served the quest for knowledge. In truth, I was driven by something my augmented nature had not fully suppressed. Curiosity bordering on obsession. I needed to understand what this thing was, how it functioned, what purpose drove its existence. The drones launched in a dispersed pattern, approaching the bioship from multiple vectors to avoid presenting a unified target should it prove hostile. My caution was warranted but ultimately insufficient. The bioship detected them when they were still thousands of kilometers distant. I watched its psychic signature spike, saw command pulses radiate through its structure in patterns that suddenly made the thing seem less like a single organism and more like a colony of billions acting in perfect concert. Defense systems I had not yet identified activated with frightening speed. Appendages that had been folded against the hull snapped outward, tracking the drones with accuracy that suggested sophisticated targeting systems. Some of these appendages fired projectiles, organic missiles that accelerated with chemical propulsion, trailing streams of vapor that froze immediately in the void. Others discharged what my sensors identified as directed electromagnetic pulses, beams of energy that ionized the thin gas around them into visible streamers. I lost 4 drones in the first salvo. They simply vanished from my sensor grid, either vaporized or disabled beyond recovery. The remaining 6 took evasive action, following randomized patterns that should have made targeting difficult. It did not matter. The bioship's weapons tracked them with inhuman precision, adjusting to each dodge and weave with response times that suggested precognitive awareness. 2 more drones died. I began transmitting override commands, trying to abort the approach and recall the survivors. The bioship had other intentions. As one drone executed a sharp turn away from the main body, it passed close to an appendage that had appeared dormant. The appendage moved with startling speed, unfurling into a cage of chitinous fingers that snapped shut around the drone. I watched helplessly as the captured device was drawn toward the hull, toward an opening that yawned wide to receive it. The drone's signal did not cut out. Instead, it continued transmitting, sending a stream of data even as it was pulled into the bioship's interior. I received images of the passage, walls that pulsed with rhythmic motion and glistened with secretions that began eating through the drone's protective casing immediately. I received chemical analysis showing compounds designed to break down metals and ceramics as efficiently as organic matter. I received thermal data showing temperatures spiking as the drone was drawn deeper, subjected to crushing pressure and corrosive environments that degraded its systems moment by moment. The final transmission was garbled, half the data corrupted by what might have been acid damage or electromagnetic interference or something else entirely. Then silence. The remaining 3 drones I managed to recall. They returned to the station damaged but intact, their casings scarred by near misses, and their sensor arrays partially blinded by electromagnetic pulses. I recovered what data I could from their brief approach. It was enough to construct preliminary maps of the bioship's external structure, to identify several major systems and begin classifying them by apparent function. I catalogued weapons arrays, propulsion appendages, sensory organs, feeding apertures, and what appeared to be launch bays for smaller organisms. I noted the layers visible where hull had been damaged by micrometeor impacts, revealing internal structures that suggested the entire ship was redundant at cellular level, capable of rerouting functions around damaged sections without apparent loss of efficiency. Most significantly, I had data from inside. I spent days analyzing the transmissions from the captured drone, extracting every fragment of information before corruption made it unreadable. The interior passages followed no standardized dimensions. They branched and merged organically, their diameters ranging from barely wide enough to admit the drone to vast chambers that could have held Imperial cruisers. The walls were not constructed of any material I could identify. They appeared to be living tissue, cellular structures arranged in layers that served multiple purposes simultaneously. Structural support, sensory input, circulatory function, neural transmission. I found evidence of specialized cells that generated bioluminescence, providing light in wavelengths suited to alien eyes. I found what appeared to be immune system components, mobile organisms that patrolled the passages consuming foreign matter and repairing damage. I found structures that could only be described as organs, though their purposes remained mysterious. The bioship continued its journey toward Tigris. I continued my observation, recording every detail of its movement and growth. It fed constantly now, extending appendages to capture any matter that came within range. Ice fragments, rocky debris, even stray atoms of hydrogen were gathered and consumed. I calculated that it was increasing its mass by approximately 0.3% per standard day, steady growth that would compound into significant size gains over the months of transit. More disturbing was the evidence that it was not merely growing larger, it was growing more complex. New structures budded from the hull and developed according to patterns I could not predict. Some became additional weapons. Others became what looked like sensory arrays or communication organs. Still others formed into shapes I could not classify, biological machines whose purposes I could only guess. 17 days after the birth, the bioship released its first spawn. I detected the event through thermal blooms on the hull surface, sections that suddenly radiated intense heat as if something within was preparing to emerge. Vast sections of hull began to bulge outward, distending like blisters rising on burned skin. The psychic signature intensified, command pulses hammering through the structure in rapid succession. I watched through every sensor as the blisters burst open and things emerged. They were smaller than the main ship, ranging from the size of attack craft to light cruisers. But they shared the same fundamental nature, living vessels, each one a self-contained organism, each one equipped with its own weapons and propulsion systems and sensory organs. They drifted free from the birth blisters and hung in space around the main bioship like attendants around a queen, their movements synchronized in ways that spoke of psychic coordination rather than individual decision. I counted 47 spawn vessels in the first release. They organized themselves into a formation that would have done credit to an Imperial fleet, maintaining precise distances and orientations that optimized sensor coverage and firing angles. The bioship continued its course without deviation, but now it was not alone. It was accompanied by an escort of living ships that moved in perfect concert with their progenitor, extensions of its will given independent mobility. I watched this fleet for hours, mapping each vessel, noting the variations in their designs. No two were identical. Each had been specialized for particular functions, some clearly built for speed and scouting, others heavily armed for combat. Still others equipped with appendages that suggested boarding or capture capabilities. The implications were staggering. This was not merely a ship. It was a mobile hive, capable of creating its own support fleet from its own biomass. Every world it consumed would provide resources to birth more vessels. Every battle would allow it to adapt, incorporating effective traits into new spawn. It was a military force that could grow exponentially, limited only by the availability of matter to consume. I transmitted these observations to Mars, knowing they would arrive too late to matter for Tigris, but hoping they might save other worlds. I included detailed specifications of the bioship's capabilities, tactical assessments of its weapons and defenses, strategic analysis of how it might be countered. I recommended immediate mobilization of multiple battle groups, suggested engagement ranges and weapon types that might prove effective, outlined evacuation protocols for worlds in the creature's path. Then, I did something that violated every protocol of the Adeptus Mechanicus. I packed my most critical equipment into the station's sole lander and prepared to follow the bioship. The rational justifications came easily. Continued close observation would provide data that could save countless lives. My station was automated and would continue passive monitoring whether I remained or not. The lander was equipped with sophisticated stealth systems that might allow me to approach undetected where drones had failed. All true and all secondary to the real reason I needed to know. The bioship represented something unprecedented in my experience, a form of life that operated on principles I had never encountered. It offended my understanding of how the universe functioned. It suggested possibilities that made my augmented components feel crude and primitive. I had devoted my existence to knowledge, and here was knowledge that walked on legs of chitin and flew through space on wings of living muscle. The lander was designed for short-range work, equipped with supplies sufficient for perhaps 3 standard months of operation before critical systems would begin failing. I modified it extensively before departure, cannibalizing equipment from the station to extend its operational lifespan and enhance its sensor capabilities. I installed additional cogitator banks to process the data I intended to gather. I upgraded the communications array with long-range transmitters that could punch messages through even intense interference. I reinforced the hull with ablative plating scavenged from cargo containers. I turned the small craft into a mobile observation post, cramped and uncomfortable but capable of maintaining surveillance for extended periods. The journey to catch the biofleet took 11 days of hard acceleration that pushed the lander's engines beyond their recommended operational limits. I spent the time analyzing every scrap of data I had collected, building predictive models of the bioship's behavior, planning observation strategies that might yield maximum information while minimizing detection risk. I slept in brief cycles, my augmented physiology requiring less rest than baseline humans, my mind too engaged with questions to allow longer periods of unconsciousness. I ate reconstituted protein paste without tasting it, my attention focused entirely on the sensor displays, showing the diminishing distance to my target. When I finally matched course with the biofleet, I maintained a distance of approximately 20,000 kilometers, far enough that I hoped to avoid immediate detection, yet close enough for detailed observation. The lander's stealth systems were functioning optimally, masking my thermal signature and minimizing electromagnetic emissions. I drifted in their wake, like a scavenger following predators, watching, recording, trying to understand. The bioship had continued spawning during my pursuit. The fleet now numbered over 200 vessels arranged in patterns that suggested sophisticated tactical doctrine. They moved through space in a formation that resembled nothing so much as a predatory organism stalking prey, sensors extended, weapons ready, every element positioned to support the others. The psychic emanations had intensified to levels that interfered with my equipment. My warp sense arrays registered near constant activity, pulses and waves, and complex modulations that carried information I could not decode. I realized I was detecting the biofleet's communications network, watching psychic signals pass between vessels with perfect clarity, despite the vast distances involved. This was coordination beyond anything Imperial forces could achieve. No delayed transmissions, no garbled orders, no misunderstandings or failures in the chain of command. Every vessel received instructions simultaneously and executed them with mechanical precision. The fleet functioned as a single distributed intelligence, each ship a neuron in a vast brain that spanned thousands of cubic kilometers of space. I focused my sensors on individual vessels, studying their structures in detail. The smallest were perhaps 30 meters long, sleek organisms that seemed built purely for speed, their bodies streamlined and equipped with powerful propulsion organs that could generate impressive acceleration. I watched them conduct scouting sweeps, ranging far ahead of the main fleet, and then returning to report findings through psychic pulses. Medium-sized vessels were more diverse, some equipped with obvious weapons, others with appendages suited for grasping or boarding, still others covered in sensory organs that suggested specialized reconnaissance functions. The largest spawn vessels rivaled Imperial frigates in size, massive creatures bristling with biological cannons and protected by hulls thick enough to withstand significant punishment. The bioship itself continued to grow. I maintained careful measurements of its dimensions and calculated that it had increased its length by nearly 4 kilometers since my initial observations. New structures appeared regularly, budding from the hull and developing into mature systems within days. I watched weapons arrays grow from tiny nodules into massive installations capable of launching projectiles the size of landing craft. I watched sensory organs develop from simple light-sensitive patches into complex arrays that could probably detect a human heartbeat at 100 kilometers. The rate of development was impossible by any standard I knew, suggesting metabolic processes operating at efficiencies that violated thermodynamic principles. 63 days after departing my station, the biofleet reached the outer system of Tigris. The first engagement was brief and utterly one-sided. A patrol flotilla of the Imperial Navy, 3 Sword-class frigates conducting routine sweeps of the system's edge, detected the biofleet on long-range augers and moved to investigate. Standard protocol for contact with unknown vessels. Challenge, identify, prepare for possible hostile action. I listened to their transmissions, heard the confidence in their Vox traffic as they approached what they assumed were simply unusually configured ships. That confidence lasted until they achieved visual contact. I heard the shock in their voices as they realized they faced something alive. I heard confusion turn to alarm, turn to terror as the biofleet's weapons opened fire. The bioship did not engage directly. It hung back while its spawn vessels swept forward in a coordinated assault that demonstrated tactical sophistication equal to anything in Imperial doctrine. The smaller, fast-attack organisms came first, swarming the frigates from multiple angles, forcing them to split their defensive fire. Then the medium vessels closed, launching projectiles that I identified as living ammunition, organisms engineered to survive the void and impact with explosive force. The Imperial ships fought well, their weapon batteries tracking targets with practiced efficiency, their void shields flaring as they absorbed impacts. It was not enough. The biofleet adapted to their tactics in real time, vessels adjusting their approach vectors to exploit gaps in defensive coverage, weapons retargeting to focus fire on ships whose shields showed signs of weakness. The first frigate died 17 minutes after engagement began. Its void shields collapsed under concentrated fire, and the hull beneath was laid open by projectiles that bored through armor like insects through rotting wood. I watched atmosphere vent from dozens of breaches, saw secondary explosions ripple along its length as plasma conduits ruptured and munitions cooked off. It drifted dead in space, a tomb for the 1,000 souls who had crewed it. The second frigate lasted 9 minutes longer, managing to destroy several of the smaller bio-vessels before it too was overwhelmed. The third attempted to disengage, its captain recognizing the impossibility of victory and seeking to withdraw and warn the inner system. The biofleet did not allow it. Fast attack organisms pursued, overtaking the fleeing ship despite its best acceleration, latching onto its hull and beginning to tear through the armor with appendages that combined cutting edges with acid secretions. I recorded everything, capturing detailed imagery of the bioweapons in action, analyzing their capabilities and limitations. I noted that the living projectiles showed signs of guidance systems, adjusting their courses mid-flight to track moving targets. I observed that the acid secretions were not uniform, that different organisms employed different chemical compositions, apparently optimized for different armor types. I documented the biofleet's tactical patterns, noting how vessels covered each other's approaches and concentrated fire to maximize damage. I was watching the product of evolutionary refinement applied to warfare, predators honed by countless battles across the galaxy into perfect killing machines. The third frigate's death was prolonged and terrible. The bioorganisms attached to its hull did not simply breach the armor, they bored into it, creating passages through which more organisms could enter. I received fragmentary vox transmissions from the ship, screams and prayers and desperate pleas for aid that would never arrive. Then the transmissions cut out as the bioorganisms presumably reached the crew compartments. The frigate drifted silent for another hour before it began to show signs of internal consumption. I watched its hull slowly collapse inward as everything inside was dissolved and processed, watched the bioorganisms emerge bloated with absorbed nutrients and return to the main bioship to be reintegrated into its mass. The engagement had lasted less than 3 hours. 3 Imperial warships and approximately 3,000 trained personnel had been eliminated without causing significant damage to the biofleet. I calculated that the bioship had actually gained mass from the encounter, the nutrients absorbed from the destroyed frigates, more than compensating for whatever biomass had been expended in spawning the attacking organisms. This thing did not merely win battles. It grew stronger from them, turning enemy vessels into food that fueled further expansion. Every victory would make it more dangerous. Every defeat it inflicted would swell its ranks. The biofleet continued into the Tigris system without pausing. The psychic signature intensified in ways that suggested anticipation or perhaps hunger. I realized with sick certainty that it could sense the billions of lives ahead, could feel the biomass waiting to be consumed. The spawn vessels spread into a wider formation, optimizing sensor coverage as they swept toward the inhabited worlds. I followed at maximum stealth, my systems minimized to the point that I was running on emergency power alone, hoping my minimal signature would be lost in the background radiation of space. Tigris Prime was a mining world, its surface pocked with open-pit excavations and covered with processing facilities that refined ore for shipment to Forge worlds throughout the sector. Population: 1.7 billion, mostly indentured workers and their families living in vast hab complexes built around the mining sites. Orbital defenses: 4 Monitor-class system defense ships, outdated designs with limited void combat capability, supported by a network of weapon platforms and minefields. On paper, it seemed like reasonable protection for a world of limited strategic value. Against what approached it was utterly inadequate. The System Defense Force detected the biofleet when it was still 4 days from Tigris Prime. They began broadcasting warnings, demanding identification and transmitting threat assessments to planetary authorities. I listened to their communications and heard the growing desperation as reports from the outer system arrived, as survivors from merchant vessels that had witnessed the patrol flotilla's destruction shared their testimony. The planet's governor ordered a general evacuation, but moving 1.7 billion people off-world would take months, even with every available transport working continuously. The defense forces prepared for a battle they had to know they could not win, buying time for as many civilians as possible to escape. The biofleet arrived at Tigris Prime, preceded by a wave of psychic pressure that sent every psyker in the system into convulsions. I felt it even through the heavy shielding of my lander, a weight pressing against my consciousness that made thought difficult and triggered warnings in augmented components designed to detect warp phenomena. The spawn vessels swept through the outer defensive perimeter with contemptuous ease, destroying minefields by the simple expedient of absorbing the detonations against armored hulls, eliminating weapon platforms with concentrated fire from biological cannons that launched projectiles with force comparable to macro batteries. The monitor ships lasted longer, their crews fighting with courage that deserved better odds. But courage means nothing against an enemy that feels no fear and learns from every exchange. I watched the bioship take up position in high orbit, hovering above Tigris Prime like a vulture over carrion. Spawn vessels descended toward the surface in organized waves, protected by larger organisms that engaged the remaining orbital defenses. The invasion had begun. I maneuvered my lander into the shadow of a destroyed weapon platform, using its wreckage to mask my signature, and trained every sensor I possessed on the planet below. What I witnessed in the following days would have broken a mind less reinforced by augmentation. The spawn vessels that reached the surface were different from those used in void combat. These were specialized for planetary assault, their bodies equipped with appendages suited for movement in gravity and atmosphere. Some were quadrupedal, others moved on, undulating bellies or chitinous legs that numbered in the dozens. All were accompanied by smaller organisms, human-sized creatures that poured from the larger vessels in swarms that darkened the sky. These smaller organisms were clearly designed for close combat, equipped with razor-edged claws and fangs and appendages that served as biological weapons. They moved with frightening speed and coordination, responding to psychic commands that directed them toward population centers with unerring accuracy. The Imperial Guard regiments stationed on Tigris Prime fought desperately. I observed their defensive positions through orbital surveillance, watched them establish kill zones and concentrate fire on the approaching swarms. Their lasguns were effective at individual kills. Their heavy weapons could destroy the larger organisms with sustained fire, but there were too many attackers coming from too many directions. The bioswarms adapted to their tactics with unnatural speed. Organisms that survived initial contact displayed behaviors specifically designed to counter the defenses they had encountered. They approached from new angles, used cover more effectively, focused attacks on weapon positions and command structures. The biofleet was learning from every engagement, evolving its tactics in real time to optimize the slaughter. Entire cities fell within hours. I watched hab complexes overrun, saw swarms pour through breached walls and flow along streets like floodwater, saw desperate last stands that ended in screams broadcast over Vox channels. I could not bring myself to stop monitoring. The bioorganisms did not simply kill, they collected. Bodies were gathered by specialized organisms equipped with grasping appendages, dragged to collection points where larger creatures waited. These collector organisms were mobile digestive systems, their bodies consisting primarily of vast stomachs that could dissolve organic matter with incredible efficiency. They consumed the dead and dying without discrimination, processing human bodies into nutrient slurry that was pumped into storage sacks for transport back to orbit. I observed this harvesting process in detail that will haunt whatever remains of my sanity. The bioorganisms were not wasteful. They took everything. The bodies, the clothing, the organic components of equipment and structures. I watched them strip a hab complex down to bare metal and rock, consuming every trace of biological matter including wooden furniture, leather upholstery, even the bacteria that lived in the soil around the foundations. Within days, the areas they had swept through looked sterilized, lifeless in ways that went beyond mere absence of people. The very concept of life had been extracted and shipped to orbit to feed the waiting bioship. The planetary defense collapsed completely on the 6th day of the invasion. The remaining guard units were scattered and isolated, cut off from supply and reinforcement, facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger as they grew weaker. Many chose death over capture, detonating munitions or plasma weapons in final acts of defiance that at least denied their biomass to the enemy. Others fought until they were overwhelmed, going down under waves of chitinous bodies that bore them to the ground and tore them apart with methodical efficiency. A few managed to escape off-world, boarding the last evacuation transports and fleeing the system with whatever civilians they could carry. I estimated the total evacuation saved perhaps 3% of Tigris Prime's population. The rest became food. The bioship descended into low orbit as the harvesting operation reached its peak. I watched collection organisms shuttle between surface and orbit in continuous streams, delivering their cargo to feeding apertures that gaped wide to receive them. The bioship was consuming Tigris Prime, not merely its population but the biomass of the entire planetary ecosystem. Organisms descended to the oceans and began processing marine life. Vast filtering appendages that strained plankton and fish from the water, while others hunted larger creatures. Swarms spread across the continents, consuming every plant, every animal, every microscopic organism they encountered. I calculated that they were stripping the planet of approximately 40 million metric tons of biomass per standard day, a rate of consumption that would leave Tigris Prime a lifeless rock within months. During this massacre, I maintained my hidden position and continued recording. Part of me screamed that I should do something, should intervene somehow despite the laughable inadequacy of my resources against such overwhelming force. The rational portions of my mind recognized the futility of such action. I was one aging Magos in a barely armed lander. I could accomplish nothing except my own death, which would serve no purpose beyond denying the Mechanicus the data I was gathering. I told myself that information was the only weapon I could bring to bear, that understanding the enemy was essential to eventually defeating it. I told myself this and continued to watch as billions died and a world was consumed. The bioship began to change in observable ways as it fed. The growth rate increased dramatically, its length expanding by over a kilometer per day as it absorbed the massive influx of nutrients. New structures appeared across the hull with startling rapidity, budding and developing and achieving apparent maturity within hours rather than days. I observed what appeared to be entire new organ systems growing into being, chambers and passages and specialized structures whose purposes I could only guess. The spawn vessel production increased as well. Birth blisters appeared across the hull in unprecedented numbers, each one gestating a new organism, the bioship converting its feast into an ever larger fleet. On the 15th day after the invasion began, I detected something that changed my understanding of what I was observing. A section of the bioship's hull, one I had been monitoring for structural analysis, suddenly became translucent. Not transparent, but translucent enough that my sensors could penetrate the outer layers and observe what lay beneath. I saw chambers, vast spaces within the bioship's body, and within those chambers I saw things that made my augmented heart skip its mechanical rhythm. Humans, living humans, suspended in some kind of fluid-filled sacs, their bodies penetrated by tendrils that pulsed with rhythmic motion. They were not being consumed, they were being preserved, maintained in some kind of stasis or hibernation. I counted hundreds in that one section, and my analysis suggested similar chambers existed throughout the bioship's interior. The implications were staggering. The bioorganisms were not merely killing and consuming, they were capturing and storing live specimens. For what purpose I could not determine, but the fact that they had a purpose beyond immediate consumption suggested intelligence and planning on a scale I had not fully appreciated. These creatures were not simple predators. They were conducting what might be described as systematic harvesting, sorting their prey into categories and processing each according to some predetermined plan. The dead became nutrients. The living became something else, prisoners or specimens or raw material for some process I had not yet observed. I refocused my sensors, scanning the bioship's hull for other translucent sections, other windows into its interior. I found several, each one revealing different types of chambers. Some contained what appeared to be genetic material, vast repositories of stored DNA suspended in nutrient baths. Others held what looked like embryonic organisms in various stages of development. New spawn being gestated according to patterns I could not predict. Still others contained structures I could not classify, biological machines whose functions defied my understanding. I was looking at the interior of an organism more complex than anything in Imperial records, a living factory that could consume, process, store, and recombine biological material with efficiency that made Mechanicus Manufactorums look primitive by comparison. My observations were interrupted by a sudden spike in the bioship's psychic signature. The pulses that had been constant since my first detection intensified into a wave that sent pain lancing through my organic brain tissue despite all augmented protections. My cogitators registered massive electromagnetic fluctuations, energy readings that spiked beyond the capacity of my sensors to measure accurately. Something was happening inside the bioship, some process activating that dwarfed everything I had observed so far. I watched the hull ripple with motion, saw structures that had been dormant suddenly activate, felt the psychic pressure build until the very fabric of space seemed to strain under its weight. The bioship was preparing to leave. The harvesting of Tigris Prime was not complete. Vast stretches of the planet remained unprocessed, but apparently the bioship had determined it had gathered sufficient resources. The spawn vessels began returning to orbit in organized waves, reintegrating with the main body through apertures that opened to receive them. I watched as organisms that had been conducting surface operations were literally absorbed back into the bioship, their individual structures dissolving as they merged with the greater whole. The fleet was consolidating, drawing itself back together into a more compact formation suitable for void travel. Within hours, the swarm of hundreds of independent vessels had reduced to perhaps 50. The rest consumed and integrated into the bioship's mass. Then something happened that violated every principle of physics I understood. The bioship began to glow, not with heat or reflected light, but with a luminescence that seemed to originate from within its cellular structure. The glow intensified, spreading across the entire hull, making the thing visible despite the darkness of space around it. My sensors registered massive energy buildup, readings that suggested the bioship was channeling power on a scale comparable to a battleship's main reactor. The psychic signature reached levels that made my warp sense arrays scream warnings, the pulses combining into a continuous pressure that felt like a weight pressing against reality itself. Space tore open. Not with the gradual transition of standard warp translation, but with violent suddenness that sent shockwaves radiating outward in all directions. A rift appeared, a wound in the fabric of reality that bled light in colors that had no name, and the bioship moved toward it without hesitation. I realized with horror that this thing could create its own warp passages, could tear through the barrier between material space and the immaterium through some biological process I could not begin to understand. It was not dependent on warp drives or navigators or any of the technology the Imperium required for faster-than-light travel. It simply opened a hole in space and entered, dragging the remnants of its fleet behind it. I had seconds to make a decision that would determine my fate. My lander was not equipped for warp travel. Its systems included no Geller field, no warp drive, nothing that would allow it to survive the immaterium. If I allowed the bioship to escape without following, I would lose contact, waste the weeks I had spent in observation, fail in my self-appointed task of gathering data. If I followed, I would almost certainly die, torn apart by warp entities or driven mad by exposure to the raw chaos of the immaterium. My augmented components calculated probabilities, evaluated options, presented conclusions. My organic components, the stubborn remnants of the human I had once been, made a decision that had nothing to do with logic. I fired my engines at maximum burn and dove toward the closing rift. The transition was instant and agonizing. One moment I was in real space, the next I was somewhere else, somewhere that violated every law of physics and geometry. My lander's hull groaned under stresses it was never designed to withstand. Systems began failing immediately, protective fields collapsing, sensors returning data that made no sense, cogitators crashing as they attempted to process impossible inputs. I felt the immaterium pressing against my mind, felt things in the darkness beyond my hull taking notice of my presence, felt my sanity begin to fray at the edges despite all augmented reinforcements. The bioship saved me, though it certainly did not intend to. The same field that protected it from the warp's predations extended far enough to encompass my lander, creating a bubble of relative stability in which the laws of reality maintained some semblance of function. I was riding in the wake of something vast enough to push back the chaos, sheltering in the shadow of a creature that moved through the immaterium as easily as through normal space. My systems began to recover, enough to maintain basic operations, enough to continue recording, though the data I gathered made increasingly little sense. Time had no meaning in the warp. We might have traveled for seconds or centuries. The journey might have covered light years or impossible distances that defied measurement. I have vague memories of watching the bioship move through that howling chaos, of seeing appendages extend and retract as if testing the substance of unreality, of feeling psychic pulses that seemed to navigate by instinct or perhaps by following scents imperceptible to human awareness. I remember seeing things in the distance, vast shapes that might have been daemons or might have been warp predators or might have been something else entirely, and I remember watching the bioship avoid them with movements that suggested long practice at this form of travel. Then we were through, reality reasserting itself with a shock that felt like being born. My lander's systems stabilized, sensors returning to normal function, cogitators rebooting and beginning to process the data backlog that had accumulated during our time in the warp. I ran immediate diagnostics and found damage throughout my craft. Nothing immediately critical, but enough that I would need to conduct repairs soon if I wanted to maintain operational capability. I checked my chronometer and discovered that by its reckoning we had been in the warp for 7 days. Whether that matched the time experienced by the bioship or bore any relation to how long had passed in real space, I had no way to determine. We had emerged in an unknown system, coordinates that matched nothing in my navigation databases. My sensors showed 6 planets orbiting a yellow star, none of them obviously inhabited, but several possessing atmospheric compositions compatible with human life. The bioship oriented itself toward the 4th planet, the one that returned spectroscopic readings showing rich biodiversity, oceans and forests, and complex ecosystems that had never felt human touch. I realized with weary inevitability what would happen next. The bioship had traveled light years in days, had crossed distances that would take Imperial vessels months or years, all to find another feeding ground. The harvest would begin again. But first, the bioship did something I had not observed before. It stopped in high orbit and began a process that I can only describe as metamorphosis. Sections of hull that had appeared solid became suddenly fluid, reshaping themselves into new configurations. Organs moved within the body, repositioning themselves according to patterns that suggested optimization for new purposes. The spawn vessels that had remained integrated with the main body began to emerge, but these were different from the previous generation. They had been redesigned, modified based on whatever lessons the bioship had learned during the Tigris Prime invasion. I watched new weapon types develop, saw armor patterns that looked thicker and more complex, observed sensory organs that suggested enhanced capability. The bioship was adapting, not through slow evolutionary change across generations, but through direct modification of its own structure and the structures of its spawn. It had encountered resistance at Tigris Prime, had observed Imperial tactics and weapons, and now it was redesigning itself to counter what it had learned. Future invasions would face an enemy that had already adapted to Imperial doctrine, that had already developed countermeasures to standard defensive strategies. Every world it attacked would make it better at attacking the next. Every battle would refine its capabilities. This thing was not merely a weapon, it was a weapon that improved itself through use. I spent weeks in that system, maintaining my hidden position and recording the bioship's activities. I watched it deploy new spawn to the planet below, observed harvesting operations that were more efficient than what I had seen at Tigris Prime, the swarms moving in patterns that minimized wasted effort and maximized biomass collection rate. I watched the bioship feed and grow, absorbing the life of an entire world to fuel its endless expansion. I documented new spawn types being birthed, catalogued their capabilities, tried to predict what they might be designed to do. I composed detailed reports that I transmitted toward Imperial space at intervals, hoping that at least some of them would reach receivers who could make use of the intelligence. My supplies dwindled. The lander's recycling systems could only extend resources so far, and I had been operating for months beyond the craft's designed endurance. I faced a choice. Attempt to return to Imperial space using the limited fuel and supplies remaining, or continue observation until my systems failed completely. The decision should have been simple. My duty to the Mechanicus demanded that I preserve the data I had gathered, that I return to civilization and deliver my reports in person. But the obsession that had driven me to follow the bioship had only grown stronger. I needed to know more. I needed to understand not just what this thing did, but how it did it, what principles governed its existence, what purpose drove it across the galaxy, consuming everything it encountered. So I made a decision that will define me until whatever end awaits. I plotted a course that would bring my lander close to the bioship during one of its feeding operations, close enough that I might be drawn into its interior the way my drone had been drawn in so many months before. If I was captured and consumed, at least my death would serve the purpose of knowledge. If I somehow survived and managed to observe the bioship's internal functions directly, the intelligence I could gather might save worlds. Either outcome seemed preferable to simply fleeing and wondering what secrets I had missed. I began my approach when the bioship was distracted by a particularly intense phase of spawning. Its attention turned inward as it gestated a new wave of organisms. I kept my engines at minimal thrust, drifting more than flying, hoping to be mistaken for debris, or perhaps not noticed at all. My lander's stealth systems were failing after months of continuous operation, but I coaxed them into one final effort, masking my signature as much as the degraded components allowed. I moved closer, kilometers becoming hundreds of meters, my sensors providing increasingly detailed images of the bioship's hull. The surface was not smooth as it appeared from distance. Up close, I could see that it was covered in textures, ridges and valleys and pores that suggested skin more than armor. I could see fluids seeping from some sections, glistening in the starlight with colors that spoke of complex chemistry. I could see movement beneath the surface, the shadows of organs shifting position, the pulse of circulation visible through translucent layers. I was looking at something alive in ways that made my augmented nature feel dead by comparison. This thing was life concentrated and optimized and weaponized, every cell dedicated to the single purpose of consuming and converting and reproducing. An appendage unfolded from the hull ahead of me, moving with the lazy grace of a predator that has spotted prey. I had been noticed. The appendage extended toward my lander, subdividing as it approached into smaller tendrils that spread to surround my craft. I did not attempt to flee. Instead, I cut my engines and allowed myself to drift, passive, making no movements that might be interpreted as aggressive. The tendrils made contact with my hull, wrapping around it with surprising gentleness, and began to draw me toward an opening that yawned in the bioship's surface. The last thing my external sensors registered before entering was the vastness of the bioship from this perspective, the sense of being consumed by something so large that I could spend a lifetime exploring and never see all of it. Then I was inside, pulled through a sphincter of muscle tissue that contracted around my lander and drew it deeper into the bioship's body. The interior was darkness broken by bioluminescence, patches of tissue that glowed in blues and greens and purples, providing enough light to see but creating shadows that seemed to move with independent life. The passage I traveled was lined with what I can only describe as cilia, countless hair-like projections that waved in patterns, suggesting they were tasting or sensing my passage. My lander was carried along by peristaltic contractions, pushed deeper into the bioship by muscular movements that were disturbingly similar to being swallowed. I activated my internal sensors, recording everything, measuring temperature and pressure and chemical composition of the atmosphere that now surrounded me. The air was breathable, surprisingly, high in oxygen with elevated carbon dioxide but not toxic, maintained at temperatures that would be comfortable for baseline humans. I realized the bioship's internal environment was designed to support life, not human life specifically, but life in general, creating conditions where captured organisms could be preserved without requiring specialized containment. The walls around me glistened with moisture, secretions that my analysis showed contained nutrients and trace minerals. This was not merely a passage but a feeding tube designed to transport materials while simultaneously beginning the digestive process. The journey into the depths lasted perhaps 30 minutes, time measured by my chronometer since my normal sense of duration had become unreliable. Eventually, I was deposited in a chamber, expelled through another sphincter into a space vast enough that my lander's lights could not reach the far walls. I activated external floods, illuminating the chamber in harsh white light that revealed a cathedral of flesh. The walls curved upward into darkness, supported by structures that resembled ribs or perhaps buttresses, biological architecture that served structural purposes while also fulfilling functions I could only guess. The floor was covered in a layer of fluid, perhaps a meter deep, viscous and warm, that my sensors identified as primarily water mixed with dissolved organic compounds. I was not alone in the chamber. My lights revealed other objects, masses that floated in the fluid or rested on the floor, things that had been consumed by the bioship and transported here for processing. I saw chunks of stone and metal, fragments of destroyed buildings or perhaps ships, already beginning to show signs of dissolution as the bioship's digestive fluids ate into them. I saw more organic material, piles of biomass that might have been plant matter or animal tissue, impossible to identify in their current state of decomposition. I saw what might have been bodies, human or alien, reduced to masses of flesh that were slowly being absorbed into the fluid. I suited up, donning the environmental armor my lander carried for occasions requiring external activity. The suit was old, its systems showing the wear of decades of use, but it sealed properly and provided protection from the chamber's atmosphere and the fluids that covered the floor. I opened the lander's hatch and stepped out, immediately sinking knee-deep into the warm, viscous liquid. The sensation was disturbing beyond the physical discomfort. The knowledge that I was wading through what amounted to the bioship's stomach acid, that the same fluids slowly dissolving the debris around me were being held back from my flesh only by a layer of aging armor. I began to explore, moving carefully through the chamber, my suit's lights cutting through the bioluminescent gloom. The walls were not smooth but covered in features, orifices that might have been secondary digestive openings, nodules that pulsed with internal light, structures that looked disturbingly like eyes, though they showed no signs of following my movements. I approached one wall and touched it, feeling warmth through my glove, feeling the subtle pulse of circulation beneath the surface. I took samples, using the small cutting tools my suit carried to extract pieces of tissue for later analysis. The bioship did not react, did not seem to notice or care about this minor damage. I found passages leading out of the chamber, openings in the walls that suggested the bioship's interior was networked, chambers connected by corridors in ways that might mirror an animal's internal anatomy or might follow completely alien organizational principles. I chose one passage at random and entered, leaving my lander behind with its automated systems set to continue recording. The passage was narrower than the main chamber, barely wide enough for me to walk upright, its walls close enough that I could touch both sides simultaneously. They were warm, almost hot, and they moved with rhythmic contractions that pushed me forward whether I willed it or not. I traveled deeper into the bioship, moving through a maze of passages and chambers, each one different from the last. I found chambers that appeared to be storage, filled with organized masses of biological material suspended in preservative fluids. I found chambers that looked like workshops, where I could see organisms being assembled piece by piece from component parts, new spawn being constructed through processes that combined gestation with something closer to manufacturing. I found chambers full of captured humans, hundreds of them suspended in fluid-filled sacks exactly as I had observed through the translucent hull sections, their bodies penetrated by feeding tubes but showing signs of life, their chests rising and falling with slow respiration. The sight of these preserved humans affected me in ways my augmented nature usually suppressed. They were not dead, but they were not truly alive, existing in some state between that served purposes I could not fathom. Why keep them? What use did the bioship have for living humans beyond their value as biomass? I moved closer to one sack, peering through the translucent membrane at the face of the person within. Female, young, her expression peaceful, as if she merely slept. I checked my instruments and confirmed she was alive, her heart beating slowly, her brain showing minimal activity. Sedated perhaps, or simply maintained in hibernation by the bioship systems. I began taking more detailed observations, documenting everything I saw, building a mental map of the bioship's interior organization. What I discovered suggested structure far more complex than I had imagined. The bioship was not simply a vessel or even a single organism. It was an ecosystem unto itself, a mobile biosphere containing thousands or perhaps millions of component organisms all working in concert. I found what appeared to be immune system components, mobile organisms that patrolled passages and consumed foreign matter, attacking anything that did not belong. I found what looked like neural tissue spread across walls and ceiling, creating networks that pulsed with electrical activity, transmitting signals between distant sections of the bioship. I found specialized organs whose purposes I could only guess. Massive bladders that might store energy, or perhaps serve as ballast. Crystalline structures that generated electrical charges, chambers filled with gases under tremendous pressure. Time became meaningless. I wandered for hours or perhaps days, my suit systems providing recycled air and water, my augmented physiology requiring minimal nutrition to continue functioning. I slept in brief periods when exhaustion overwhelmed me, finding corners where the passage walls provided some shelter, always waking with the certainty that I would be consumed while I rested. But the bioship did not attack. It seemed to tolerate my presence the way a human body tolerates intestinal flora, neither benefiting from me nor bothered enough to mount a response. I eventually reached what I can only describe as the bioship's brain, a chamber deep in the core, perhaps 5 kilometers from where I had entered if my navigation calculations were accurate. The chamber was vast, its walls covered entirely in neural tissue that pulsed with patterns of light, electrical activity visible as it propagated through the network. The floor was dominated by a structure that defied easy description. A mass of brain tissue, the size of a building, folds and convolutions visible on its surface, the whole thing suspended in fluid and penetrated by countless nerve bundles that connected it to the surrounding walls. This was the bioship's control center, the seat of whatever intelligence guided its actions. I approached as close as I dared, my sensors recording the electromagnetic fields that radiated from the brain structure, trying to decode the patterns of activity. What I found was both more and less than I had expected. The brain did not think in any way I recognized. There were no discrete thoughts, no decision trees, no evidence of the kind of consciousness that I or even baseline humans experienced. Instead, there were patterns, endlessly repeating cycles of activity that flowed through the tissue in waves, triggering responses throughout the bioship's body. It was more like a program than a mind, a set of instructions hard-coded into biology and executed with perfect fidelity. The purpose behind those instructions became clear as I analyzed the patterns. Every pulse, every cycle of activity served a single goal: consume, convert, reproduce. The bioship did not choose to attack worlds. It did not decide to harvest biomass. It simply followed imperatives coded into its very structure, imperatives that drove it to seek out life and transform it into more of itself. It was not evil or cruel. It was not anything. It was a machine made of flesh, operating according to programming so fundamental that it existed at cellular level, and it would continue operating until it consumed everything or was destroyed. I felt something break inside me at that realization. I had spent months pursuing this thing, had risked everything to understand it, driven by the belief that comprehension would somehow provide answers. But there were no answers. The bioship existed because it had been created to exist, by what or whom I could not determine, and it would continue existing until it ran out of fuel. Humanity was simply food, the Imperium simply an obstacle, our struggles and deaths and desperate resistance merely friction against the operation of a system designed with no consideration for our existence. I began the journey back toward my lander, retracing my path through the maze of passages, moving through chambers I had documented and recorded. My suit's systems were failing, air recyclers clogged with the bioship's atmosphere, power cells running low, structural seals beginning to crack from exposure to digestive fluids. I pushed on because there was nothing else to do. because giving up would mean dying here in the darkness without anyone ever knowing what I had learned. I thought about the humans in their preservation sacks, wondered if they would be consumed eventually, or if the bioship would keep them indefinitely, living trophies of worlds it had devoured. I found my lander still intact, floating in the chamber where I had left it, its systems continuing their automated recording as programmed. I climbed aboard, sealed the hatch, and immediately began plotting an escape route. My analysis suggested that the bioship's feeding apertures might allow egress as well as ingress, that I could potentially position my lander to be expelled during the next digestive cycle. It was a desperate plan with low probability of success, but remaining inside meant certain death once my suit and lander finally failed. I waited 16 hours for the next cycle. When it came, the chamber's fluid began to drain, pulled away through passages in the floor. My lander was caught in the current and swept along, drawn through narrowing passages that squeezed the hull, threatening to crush it completely. I fired engines at minimal thrust, trying to maintain orientation, trying to avoid collision with the walls that contracted around me. The bioship's peristaltic movements accelerated, pushing me toward an exit, and suddenly I was expelled into space, vomited out through a feeding aperture that sealed immediately behind me. I found myself in orbit around the planet the bioship had been harvesting. My chronometer showed that I had been inside for 3 standard days. The bioship floated above me, continuing its work, apparently unconcerned with my escape. I oriented my lander toward the system's edge and began acceleration, burning the last of my fuel in a desperate attempt to reach safe distance before my systems failed completely. Behind me, the bioship continued to feed, its spawn vessels shuttling between surface and orbit, its body growing larger with each passing hour. I transmitted my final report using the last power in my communications array. I included everything: detailed observations of the bioship's exterior and interior, analysis of its capabilities and vulnerabilities, tactical assessments of its weapons and defenses, strategic predictions of its likely behavior patterns. I described the chambers full of preserved humans, the brain that operated on pure instinct, the adaptations it made based on encountered resistance. I warned that this was not the only such bioship, that the galaxy likely contained hundreds or thousands of them, all following the same imperatives, all consuming and converting and reproducing in an endless cycle that would not stop until nothing remained. I do not know if that transmission reached anyone. My lander's reactor failed moments after I finished broadcasting, all systems going dark as power reserves depleted completely. I floated dead in space, alone in the darkness, watching the distant bioship through my suit's simple optical lenses. I had enough air for perhaps 12 more hours. After that, I would suffocate, another victim of the thing I had spent months trying to understand. But I understood nothing. I had observed and recorded and analyzed, had penetrated to the very core of the bioship's being, and emerged with only the knowledge that understanding meant nothing. The bioship would continue, regardless of whether anyone comprehended it. It would consume Tigris Prime and the unnamed world, and countless others, would grow and spawn and spread, would execute its programming with perfect efficiency until the galaxy ran out of biomass to feed it, and nothing I had learned would change that. I think about the people I saw in those preservation sacks, wonder if they dream in their chemical sleep, if they know what has become of them. I think about the billions consumed at Tigris Prime, their bodies reduced to nutrient slurry and pumped into the bioship's digestive chambers. I think about future worlds that will fall to this thing, about the escalating adaptations that will make it ever more efficient at harvesting life. I think about the terrible simplicity of its purpose, the purity of an existence devoted entirely to consumption and reproduction. The bioship is not evil because it cannot be evil. It is a process made flesh, an algorithm executing in biological substrate, and judging it would be like judging a storm for the destruction it causes. It simply is, and it will continue being until something stops it or until there is nothing left to consume. My air grows thin. The cold penetrates my failing suit. In the distance, the bioship pulses with bioluminescence, a mobile star of living tissue, beautiful in its terrible efficiency. I have perhaps an hour remaining. I will spend it composing this final testimony, recording it in my augmented memory with the hope that someday my body might be recovered and this data extracted. Let it serve as warning. Let it inform the strategies of those who will fight these things in battles to come. Let it at least mean that my death purchased knowledge, even if that knowledge cannot prevent what approaches. The bioship exists. It feeds, it grows, it spawns, it adapts, it spreads, it is life perfected into death, and it is coming.